Hi everyone, I am Nive. So in this video, we are going to do invoice creation and follow-up email process using data table method in Robotic Enterprise Framework. Before starting this tutorial, I would like to thank Satish Prasad for posting this challenge. So let's move on to the description of this challenge or what we want to do in this challenge. So first of all, you want to go to this website rpabotworlds.com/rpa challenge hyphen invoice hyphen creation. So when you go to this website, you can get the description of the challenge here, what you want to do here, etc. So I will explain you what you want to do here, just for a easy understanding. So before starting this, before explaining the what we want to do here, first of all, you want to download the source data. Source data actually is an Excel file which actually consists of detail for invoice creation. And when you click on download here, you can download this source data. And already I have downloaded the source data, and this is the one which is downloaded when you click on source data. So it contains the details for creating the invoices. Okay, customer name, product description, quantity, price, discount, status, etc. So, so once this source data has been downloaded, so now we can move on to the description. First, what we want to do? First, we want to log to this website. So first we want to log to this website. So when you log to this website, you can see there is a login option here. So first we want to log in here. For login, we require credentials. Already the credentials are provided here. You can just copy from here. Username as admin, password as this. You can just copy paste here. Like same thing you can copy paste here and click on login. So when you click on login, a page appear like this. When this page appears, then click on invoice system, click on add invoice. Here we are actually creating the invoice. So when you click on add invoice, you can get a page like this. So this is here. Here you want to create the invoice, like providing the data from this Excel file for each customer. So let's take an example. We are creating the invoice for the customer name Sanjay J. Okay, and we are providing all the details in this in here. So first we want to select the customer. So here our customer is Sanjay Jain. So when you select Sanjay Jain, all this data are being populated. So there is no need of typing this data again here. So after filling this data, next we want to give the invoice number. Invoice number should be unique for every customer, and and it should be in this format INV hyphen 1000. That should be the format of the invoice number. Okay, and it should be incremented when you are adding when you are creating invoice for each customer. For example, let's say your invoice number for Sanjay Jain is INV 1000, and for Vishal Gupta it should be incremented by 1, that is INV 1001. For Ruchi Sharma, that is third data, it should be 1000 INV 1002, like so on. It should be incremented so that every customer name, for every customer there should be a unique invoice number. Okay, so that is why we are doing like that. After adding the invoice number, let's say I'm adding invoice number like this, invoice 1001. After adding the invoice number, you want to type the billing date. Billing date, you should add the current date itself. Let's say the current date is 30th July, so you can add billing date as 30 itself. After typing the billing date, next you want to type the due date. The due date should be always billing date plus 45 days. Okay, then 45 days after billing date it should be typed here. For example, your billing date is actually 30th July, so you are mostly after 45 days. T plus 45 means the current date plus 45 days should be added in the billing date, in the due date. So it should be near to around, I think, September 15. Okay, So we have added billing date as the current date and due date as billing date plus 45 days. After adding this, now you want to provide the status. If you look at the customer, for each customer, status is provided as paid, unpaid, overdue, etc. So for our case, Sanjay Jain, status is provided as paid. So click on, from the drop down, click on paid. So when you click on pay, after doing this, now you have to go to product. You want to type the product. The product means product description that is being provided here. Okay, for Sanjay Jain, this is the product description. So just I will copy here for you to understand what you want to write here. In the product you want to add this data. That is product, you want to add this data for each customer. Okay, next you want to add quantity. For each customer, quantity is specified. For our Sanjay Jain, quantity specified is as 5. So specify it as here 5. Similarly, for price is also specified for each customer. I think for Sanjay Jain it is specified as 440. So specify it also here as 440. And tax. If you look at the description of this challenge in this website, you can find that tax should be always 18% of GST. So here the tax, what we want to type here is the percentage. Here we specify that tax is 18% of GST. So for every customer, it is as 18% of GST. So you should provide the percentage here. It should be 80. Okay, it should be same for every customer. Please note also that. Okay, after providing the tax number tax, next you want to type the discount. And for each customer, you can see discount is given. So here you can see discount is around 350. Okay, so provide here it as 350. So after providing all the details, next click on save invoice. So when you click on save invoice, you can see our invoice has been created with invoice number, let's say 1001, and amount and due date. Okay, after creating this invoice, what you want to do, you know that if you take this Excel file, you can see that all the data has not been filled. Some data has to be filled off: invoice number, total amount, comment. This data you want to fill. So where you get this data for each customer? If you look, when you click on save invoice, you will direct to a window like this, and you find the invoice created here. And you, for typing this data, invoice number, total amount, comment means it actually indicate whether our invoice creation has been success or not. And in our case, you can see this invoice has been created successfully, so you can type it as success. In some cases, for example, if the name, if you look at the customer name, sometimes this sometimes some of the name may be not present inside these drop down boxes. So at the same time, you can't create invoices. At the same time, you can provide comment as failure. Okay, so that is about the comment. Regarding the invoice number, you can get the invoice number for each customer. For example, invoice number for Sanjay Jain is 1001. You can get it from here. Okay, invoice 1001 that you want to type here. At the same time, total amount. The total amount data you can get, this is the total amount. This data has to be extracted and has to be right here for each customer. And comment already we have discussed. Okay, so after like adding this data into that Excel file, after that what you want to do, just click on download to download this invoice, and download this invoice and save it in a particular folder. Okay, after doing this, uh, for one single customer our process has been completed. So what we have done here, we first type the details and then we click on save invoice, then invoice is created. From there we have extracted the invoice number, amount, and we type whether the invoice has been created successfully or not. If it is successful, we type success. If it is not successful, we should type failure. That is what we have done here. After updating these values, next we want to click on we want to download the invoice by clicking on this download button. Okay, so this is a step that we have done for a single customer, and the same step we want to repeat for other customers also. For after downloading the invoice, you want to create another invoice. For that you can click on this add invoice button, and you can create another invoice for the another customer. For example, for first customer we have created the invoice. Next you can create invoice for second customer like that, and the same step has to be repeated that I have told you earlier. Okay, so this is what we have to do here. And after downloading all these invoices, what we want to do after downloading all the invoices, and along with downloading invoice we are updating the values. So along with downloading invoice we are updating the values, and in last step what we want to do here is, since we are downloading these invoices and we want to zip it, and along with this updated excel sheet, updated excel sheet means updating it with invoice number, total amount and comment, along with this excel sheet and the zipped invoice file you want to email, you can email it. You can see the description here. Like once these invoices are created, you need to download the invoices and zip all of them to a folder and send it to a configured email. And it should also contain the source data, that is this excel data with the generated invoice number, total amount and with status in case of success or failure. Okay, that is what I meant. Okay, so this is the last. So this is all what we want to do in our invoice processing challenge. I think you have understood the description of this challenge. So let's begin by creating a RE framework workflow for this invoice process. So open the UiPath Studio. Then we want to create a new workflow. So give it a name. Let's say invoice uh, processing uh, email. Okay. Then save it in a specified folder for me and just saving it here. Framework. Okay. So I'm saving it here. Click on save. Okay, it is creating the workspace. Yeah. So before starting this work, let me transfer this source data to the workflow folder so that it can be easily accessed. So I'm pasting this uh, Excel source data here so that it can be easily accessed. So just open the main workflow. So before starting with any RE framework tutorial, so first we want to know what is actually our transaction item. So please note that in this tutorial we are going to do using data table method. Okay, and actually this is our Excel file, and the first step of our RI framework tutorial, like any work when we are doing in RI framework, is first we want to identify what is actually our transaction item, that is what is a variable type of transaction item. Here what we are doing in this challenge, we are taking each customer data, and for each customer data we are creating invoice and then we are updating the values. Okay, so that is what we are doing, and at last we are actually emailing the invoices along with this updated workflow. That is what we are doing here. So since we are creating each like we are creating invoice for each customer name, so we can consider each data row in this Excel file as what? Transaction item. So in general, like in default, you can see that the transaction item variable type is what? Q item. So we know that since we are processing like each customer name, like we are taking the each customer data and then we are like typing here and we are creating the invoices that we are doing here. So we can consider each data row as the transaction item here. Okay, so first we want to change the variable type of our transaction item. It is actually a queue item. So just change to data row. So just search it here, data row, system dot data row. So when you click here, you can see that there are many validation errors are being thrown, okay, due to the change in the variable type of transaction item. So first correct all these things, okay. Let's correct transaction item equal to nothing. Just open the get transaction workflow, change the argument type of out transaction item from queue item to data row, then click on save. As we know that in the get transaction data state, we are not requiring this get transaction item activity, as this is used while we are working with queues, which is actually used to retrieve the queue items from a queue actually in the orchestrator. It is actually not required because we are working in data table method. So we can just disable this get transaction activity by using disable activity. Okay, click on save and close it, and again correct the add here as transaction item, click on OK. Still there is a validation error, so go here and correct all these things again. Transaction item equal to what? Is equal to nothing. Okay, so click on save, and after that like we have rectified all the validation error in the get transactional data. So after that we want to remove the validation error in the process transaction. For that, click open on process transaction, then here open the workflow, click on argument, change the argument type of in transaction item from queue item to data row, click on enter, and then click on save, then again go to import argument, then transaction item, click OK. After that like go to set transaction section and open the workflow, and change the argument type to data row, and like now a validation array is thrown here. Correct all the validation array in all these three states. Here this one is not required because we are working with data row transaction item. So this is used whenever transaction item is actually a queue item. So we can just disable this, then click on save. After that do the same operation for all the other cases. Okay, so disable this activity also, click on save, and system exception, go here and disable this activity too, and also disable this. This is also used whenever transaction item is a queue item, which is not required in our case now. So click on save. I think all the validation error in the set transaction status has been removed. Click close it, just click OK. Now you can see that all the validation error in the process transaction also has been removed. Okay, so now let's start by doing this workflow. Okay, so first of all what we want to do is the initialization state. So what is normally we are doing in initialization state, we are opening the applications or browsers etc which are required for our automation work. That is what we are doing in the initialization state. In our case what we want to do in initialization state, we want to, let's say, just let me log out from this to show what we want to do in the initialization state. In our initialization state what we want to do, we want to open this website. Okay, for opening the website we want to use credentials which is typed here, and then we want to click login. So that is what we want to do in the initialization state. Okay, so For that, just go here, click on init all application workflow. So what you want to do in initialization state, you want to type the credentials. Like, first you want to open the browser to this website. After opening this website, you want to type the credentials here. Like, just type the credentials here, and then you want to click on login. Okay, after clicking okay, so that is we want to open the browser. That is what we want to do in the initialization state. Okay, so mm, so let me create a workflow for that. So before creating the sequence for opening this website, we want like store this credential data. For storing the credential data, either you can use assets or you can use Windows Credential Manager. Now in this case, we can use Windows Credential Manager. Okay, you can use assets also, but in my case I'm using credential manager. Credential Manager. Okay, click on Windows Credential Manager and click on Add Generic Credential. Now we can add the credential data here. So give it a name. Let's say invoice processing. Give it a username. Username is what? Uh, just copy this. This is a username. Okay. So just go here. Give it a username. Password. Mm, let's say this is a password and just copy pasting it. Okay, so just copy paste the password. After that, click on OK. Now the credential data has been created and it is stored in invoice processing section. Okay, so we have stored our invoice data in the credential manager. Now we want to retrieve that data from this credential manager. For that, you have to use get secure credential activity. For that, you have to install a package of uh, UiPath credential. Mm, let me check it. Credential. Yeah, this is activity UiPath.credential.activities. Okay, okay. To obtain the activity, get secure credential, which is used to retrieve the credential from the credential manager. You can use assets also here for to store the credential data and to obtain the value. Okay, no problem. So you can just search here. Like, first you create a sequence, drag a sequence. So what is the main aim of creating the sequence? To log in to the website, and that is what the main aim of the sequence, or that is the main aim of this init or application workflow. So first you want to get the credential data from where? We want to get the credential data from the Windows Credential Manager, where we have stored our credential detail. For that, you require get secure credential activity. This activity is coming as a part of the package UiPath credential.activities. Now you want to specify the target. Uh, mm, that is the generic credential name. Generic credential name is what? The generic credential name is invoice processing. So give it the name. Okay, just save it. Okay, so invoice processing. Invoice processing. I think the name spelled is correct. Sorry, give is correct me. Let me correct it. Invoice processing. Invoice processing. Okay, then click on OK. So we can retrieve the password and username from that Windows Credential Manager through this output section. There you can create a variable for that password. Click on this username, and the username variable will store the value of username which is retrieved from this in processing credential, and the password variable will store the password value from this in processing credential data. So after obtaining the data, that is after getting the credential, can give it a name, get credential. You want to, like, next is you want to log into this website, that is this website you want to log in. So for login to this website, you first want to open the browser, or first want to open this website. For that, what you want to use, you want to use open browser activity. Open browser activity. Okay, just use open browser activity here, and you want to insert the URL here. You can store this URL data inside this in config, the a config Excel file. Yeah, this is config Excel file. So just let me open it. Yeah, you can store the invoice, the URL data here. So give let's say name URL, and give the URL here. Okay. URL data here. Okay, and also I am providing the Excel file path name, like the source data file path also here. So give it a name, let's say Excel, and give the path of the, like, give the path of the Excel here. Okay. Since this can see, since the this Excel file within the is within the same workflow folder itself, so you can only provide the name of that Excel file itself. Okay, uh, provide okay. After providing these values, click on save. So next, go to constant section. Here you want to specify the maximum retry number. Maximum retry number indicates how much time our this transaction or each transaction should retry in the case of system exception. Since we are not working with queues, we should have to provide maximum retry number greater than 0 here. So just provide maximum retry number greater than 0. Okay, because while we are working with queues, there is no need to provide this maximum retry number. The reason is that in queue already we are setting the, but since we are not, in our case we are not working with queues, we want to provide this value greater than 0. Okay, so after this click on save and close it, and just let me open it because I want to see. Yeah, okay, just minimize it. Okay. So since we have stored the website details in the config file, you can directly access the URL from the config file itself. So before that, give it this activity name, that is open invoice creation website. Okay, so now you want to specify the URL here, that is in config. In config, now specify the key. The key is actually URL, so just specify the key itself as URL, and the output, and you can see that this in config is a dictionary, and the output of this dictionary is actually what, an object. To convert this value of this dictionary to a string, you want to type dot to string. Okay, So now you have through this in config dictionary you have access the URL. Okay, so after open try this, you are opening the website. So after opening the website, next process, like before typing the login details etc, just you use maximize activity, like maximize window activity, so as to maximize the window. Okay, hit a name, maximize website. Okay, so that when you're opening the window should be maximized. Okay, so after that, like after opening this website, next process what you want to type the username and password and click on login. Okay, that is what you want to do. So for that like what first use type into activity. Type into activity, so give it a name, let's say type a username, and okay, so now you want to type the username. Already from this get credential activity you have stored the username in username variable, so just type that username here, username. Okay, so it is, let's say, empty field. Okay. So after typing the username, next what you want to type password, and for typing the password you want to use what type secure text activity, because if you just check at the variable section you can see that password is a secure string, and using normal type into activity you can't type the password there. So you have to use type secure string activity, so just give it a name, let's say type password. Okay, so just click here and give the secure text, or secure text you want to type password. Okay, so after typing the password, so next what we want to do, we want to use click activity. uh, Click activity. Okay, so, simulate type. Okay, so now click here the screen. Okay, so now we are clicking on what, login button. Okay, just click, give it a name, click on login. Okay, so just simulate click it. Okay. So after clicking on login button, just after typing the credential data, admin, and let's say, oh sorry, I think I have typed the wrong credentials, so let me copy the password from here. Mm, so after typing the like username and password, you can see that you are successfully like loaded to this website. Okay, now you want to check whether your login has been successful or not. So by how you can like check whether your login is successful or not, like if you are opening this website you can see this section here, like this part is actually being seen when the login is successful. If the login is not successful, for example, just sign out. uh, okay, so just type some wrong data and you click here, you can see that a pop-up like this appear, invalid username or password. Okay, so and that case you can, like that time you can throw a business exception error, which actually indicate that the incorrect credential has been provided. So you can provide such condition also. Admin, just type password. So to check whether our login has been successfully done or not, you can use an element exist activity here. Okay, so let me do that. Let's say login part. Okay, so after login, next is you want to like check whether your login has been successfully done or not. For that, you want to use element exist activity. So element exist activity. Okay, so you want to specify, you give it a name. Let's say login successful. Okay, so indicate this on the screen. So this is the what we want to indicate on our screen, and the element exist actually creates a variable which is a boolean type, which indicates that whether this element is existing or not. Okay, just give it a variable name login success. Okay, so if our login is successful, we can just provide a log message stating that your login is successful. If our login is not successful, it indicates that we have typed incorrect credentials, and it can be considered as a case of business exception. Okay, so just I can use an if condition here, and provide the condition here as if provide the condition as if login is successful. If the login is successful, so what you want to so provide what should be the condition, that is if login is success, what you want to in the then condition, what you want to provide, you can just give a log message stating that what mm, login is success, login is success, and login is success, and if your login is not successful, then what you can say, for example, let's say I'm just signing out from here. Let's say I type some wrong credentials. So just type wrong credential, click on login. So you can see there's a pop-up like this appears, and you can at that time you can throw a business exception. You can see a error stating that incorrect credentials. Okay, incorrect credentials. At the same time, use a throw activity throw the business exception there, because incorrect data coming here, because incorrect credentials we are typing here, so we can take it as what case business rule exception. So provide the name as new business rule exception. Provide the message as what incorrect credentials. Okay, so give it a name. It's a throw error. So give it a name, let's say login success. Give it a name, let's say login failed. Okay. So after providing the condition to check whether login is successful or not, like when the login is when this element exists, we can say login is successful. When it does not exist, we can throw a business exception. And now we can just go back to our same log to our invoice creation page by logging correctly. So after after validating whether our login is successful or not, if our login is successful, next step is we want to click on the invoice system, and then we want to click on add invoice. For that we can use another click activity. Why I did this, you will get to know when we are doing further sections. Okay, I hope at that time you will understand why we are using that. Click on click on what click on invoicing system. You give it a name, invoicing system. Okay, so just indicate this over the screen. Invoicing system, then you give it another click click add invoices. Okay, so after that so provided delays, for that we can select the option of add invoices. Okay, so click on invoice. Okay, so what we have done here is, when the login is successful, we can just log a message that login is successful, and after that we want to click on this invoicing system, and then we click on add invoice. So when we are clicking on add invoice, what happens? We can get the page for entering the data for invoice. Okay, that is why we are actually using this option in the init state. You will understand when you are going further why we actually use this in this init state. Okay, so that is all what we have done in our initializing all application, that is initializing the browser here. Okay, so before that let me check whether I have selected the browser type as Chrome or Internet Explorer. Let me check it. Yeah, should be Chrome because we are using Chrome here. Okay, so then we can click on save. So I just summarize what we have done here. In this process, what we have done is, we are first acquiring the credentials which is stored in the Windows Credential Manager through this get credential activity, get secure credential activity. We are storing the email and password using password and username variable. Then after that we are logging to this, opening the website. After that we are doing the login operation, and after this we are validating whether our login is successful or not by using the element exist activity. If the login is successful, we can just log a message saying that login is success. Then we can click on invoice system. Then we can click on add invoice. If the login is not successful, we can say that the provided credentials are wrong and it is a case of incorrect data, and we can throw a business rule exception here, that we have done by using throw activity. Okay, so that is all what we have done in the init or application state. Okay. So after doing the initialization stage, next part is we want to do the get transaction data state. In get transaction data state, what we are doing, we are actually assigning each transaction item. So if you look at the RPA challenge invoice Excel file, you can see that actually we are actually inputting this each customer data into that website, and then we are creating invoice at each time. So actually our transaction item is actually each data row, and each data row actually implies each customer data are also present along with it. Okay, so what is the nature of a transaction item here? It is a data row, and the data row or the transaction item is assigned at the get transaction data state. Okay, so for that click on invoke. Now, in get transaction data state, we want to create two sequences. First, to read this Excel file and storing it in a data table. And second, from this data table, from the store data table, we want to assign the transaction item. For that, we want to create two sequences. First sequence is to read the Excel file and storing it in the data table. Okay, so that is first step that we are doing here. Okay, so Actually we want like for every transaction, actually we don't want to read this data table. So we can provide a if condition. Okay, just drag and drop if condition here. Okay, so provide a condition like reading the Excel file. Okay, so what should be the condition? Means you know that for every transaction we don't want to read that Excel file again and again. Okay, so we can provide a condition, that is if the transaction is 1, means if transaction number is 1, if transaction number dot to string dot equals uh, dot equals 1, means if it is our first transaction, then we want to read the Excel file. For that you can use read range, and we can use read range. Here we are reading the Excel file and storing it in the data table. Read Excel file, and we want to specify the workflow path. Already workflow path is specified in the config Excel file. We can access that path using in config dictionary. So in config we can check the key name of the Excel file path. Just go here, key name is Excel. So provide the name here it as uh, Excel. The output of this dictionary is a object you want to convert to string. Use dot to string, and yeah, the sheet name is actually is sheet 1 itself, so don't make any changes. Here specify the range also here like this. Now data table, like this read the Excel data is readed, then we want to store in a data table, so you can use input output transaction data. Okay, so this is the first step. Okay, so in the first sequence what we have done, we have read the Excel file and then we are storing it in a data table, that is input output transaction data. Input output transaction data is already defined in the RE framework and has a data table format. Okay, so that is why we don't need to create any other data table for storing them. So next sequence is what is the use. Next sequence is here we want to assign the transaction item. So assign the transaction item. So the assigning the transaction item, you want to provide a condition if, because what should be the condition? Condition should be in transaction number should be less than or equal to should be less, sorry, let me type it again. So what should be the condition? In transaction number should be less than or equal to input output transaction data dot rows dot count. Okay, so what does this indicate? Means if the number of transaction is indicated by the transaction number. If the number of transaction is less than the row count of the data table, that is the row count of this data table. Here the total number of data here is around 10. Okay, so if our transaction number is 11, it indicates that this is a data, and you can see that for 11 transaction there is no data here. Okay, so our condition should be for assigning transaction item should be always the number of transaction or transaction number should be less than the row count of the data table. Okay, so so if in transaction number is less than or equal to input output transaction data dot rows dot count, then what we want to do, use an assign activity to assign the transaction item. So transaction item, assign transaction item, give it a name. Out transaction item equal to, give the value as data row, that is input output transaction data dot rows dot, here we are actually assigning each data row. So in general you can specify it as in transaction transaction number, in transaction number -1. Okay, so what does this indicate? Means for example, if it is our first transaction, means if the transaction number is 1, then we are taking the first data row. So always the data in the data table starts from 0. Okay, so that is why we are representing input output transaction data dot rows bracket in transaction number minus 1. That is what it is actually assigning each transaction rows here, or each data row here. Okay, each data row is assigned into this out transaction item by using this equation. Okay, now next condition, else if this int transaction number is greater than the row count, means if the number of transaction exceeds the row count of the data table, what should be provided in the else condition? Else condition should be out transaction item should be equal to nothing. Okay, means if the number of transaction exceed the number of row count of the data table, means if it is, let's say there are 10 data here, if it is 11 transaction, what happens? There is no data here, so we can specify transaction item as nothing. When you specify transaction item as nothing, it indicates that the process is end. The process is end. So that is the use of assigning out transaction item as nothing here in the else condition. Okay, so uh, this is what we have done in the which state, get transaction data state. So just I will revise, or just I will quickly summarize what we have done in the get transaction data state. In get transaction data state, we have created two sequences. First sequence is to read the Excel file and store it in the data table by providing condition like this. If transaction number is 1, means if it is the first transaction, we want to read the Excel file, and the reader Excel file is stored in the input output transaction data variable. And after that, after storing the data table, using the data table, you want to assign the transaction item as data row. If the number of transactions is greater than the row count of transaction data, you can assign transaction item as nothing. Okay, so that is what we have done in the get transaction data section. Okay, so after completing the get transactional data state, so next is we want to move to process transaction. So what we have done up to this part, that is in the initialization state, we have opened the web browser. We have to open the web browser by using login credentials, which is stored in the Windows Credential Manager. After logging the, we went to get transaction data state. In the get transaction data state, we are assigning each transaction item for which the invoices has to be created. Okay, here our transaction item is of data row type. Okay, so each data row here like this represent each transaction item. So after assigning each transaction item, next step is what? Like in our automation challenge, what is our step? That is we want to create invoice for each, let's say for each data row as shown here. That is, in other words, you can say for each transaction item that we have been assigned, we want to create invoices. Okay, by filling the appropriate data. After filling the appropriate data, we want to click on save invoice, and after that the invoice will be created. And after the invoice is created, what we want to do, we want to download the invoice. Along with the downloading of invoice, we want to update this Excel file for each transaction item corresponding to the invoice number, total amount and comment. For each transaction item, we have to update the values. And at last, after doing all these steps, what we want to do, we want to make this like we want to zip all the invoices in a single folder, and along with the zip file, invoices zip file, and this updated Excel sheet we want to email. That is the whole main step what we want to do in our automation challenge, or invoice processing automation challenge. And in the process section, what we are going to do here is, let me open the workflow. In the process section, what we are going to do, actually in the process section, we are actually doing the three steps. One is creating the invoice based on the transaction item data, and also after creating invoice, we are downloading the invoice, and this download invoice is saved to a specified file folder. Okay, and after downloading the invoice, what we are doing, we are updating this Excel file for each transaction item corresponding to the invoice number, total amount, comment. Okay, so that is what we are going to do in the process section for all the transaction item. And the last step, that is the mailing process, emailing process, we'll do it in the get transaction state. I will tell you at that time. Okay, so let's start with the process section. So just open here. Yeah, so in the process section we are doing it in the three parts. What are the three parts? First is creating invoice, downloading invoice, then updating the Excel sheet corresponding to the invoice number, amount, and comment for each transaction item. So first we can drag and drop another sequence, and in this sequence what we are going to do, that is we are creating the invoice for each transaction item. Okay, creating invoice, can give it a name, creating invoice. Okay, so you are creating an invoice. Okay, for creating the invoice, if you look to this website, what we want to do, we want to first select the customer name. Okay, let I select the first customer name, Sanjay Jain. Automatically all these values are populated, and then we want to type the invoice number. Invoice number should be unique for every customer. That is, if you take this, like for every transaction item the invoice number should be unique, and in our case we are actually incrementing it by 1. For example, in first case Sanjay Jain, if the invoice number is, let's say, INV 1001, for the second case it should be incremented by 2, that is the invoice number should be 1002, and so on. Okay, so that is that you have to keep in mind. And after that you want to provide the billing date. The billing date should be the current date, and the due date should be 45 days plus the current date. Okay, that is 45 days after current date you have to the date should be due date. And then you want to set the status as unpaid, partially paid, or paid or overdue for each transaction item. It is being shown in this Excel file. And also you have to type the product description, which is also given for each transaction item, you can get here. And also you want to type the quantity, which is also specified for each transaction item. Price, tax should be always provided as 18 for all transaction item. That 18 represent 18% of DST, and it is automatically calculated, we don't have to worry about that. And then we want to type the discount is also provided for each transaction item also here. And after providing all the values, what we want to do, we want to click on save invoice. So that is what in the creating invoice step that we want to do here. Okay, so at first what we want to do, we want to select the customer name. Okay, so consider a condition, like actually what we are doing, we are taking the values from the Excel file and then we are inputting them. Like if you take the case of customer name, and if you see that, if you look to the customer name, it's a drop down, there's many options of the name of many customers. For example, if this Excel file contain a name which is not included in this drop down list. For example, if let me for say I included a name, let's say my name Nive, let's give a product description, blah blah, give some quantity, let's say uh, okay, so I just add a data. Okay, so if you look the like customer name Nive in the drop down list, can you find it? No. So that may be one possible chance of error that may happening with this automation. That means when the data or the name is not available in the drop down list, in that case you can call that type of error as a business exception, because the data is not found there. So you can throw a business exception there. So that, because if you don't provide a business exception there, what happens, like if you don't provide a business exception, what happens, like when automation runs, when it comes to when it comes to this transaction, it will search for this name in this drop down list. If it doesn't get the name, what happens, this website will get hacked. Okay, so at the same time it may result in system exception. So that system exception You know that when RI framework undergoes system exception, what happens commonly? It will again restart the system again and again for the same transaction. But we know that doing the same transaction again and again has no effect, because the data is incorrect or data is not found in the drop down list. So it is better that we can skip to next transaction. For skipping to next transaction, we can use the business exception, or we can throw the business exception. If you throw the business exception, you will directly go to next transaction, without retrying the same transaction again and again, actually, which is actually a waste of time. Okay, so that can be avoided by throwing the business exception. It may be one possible error that may come, so please note that also. Okay, so click on save. So for that, what we want to do, like at first, like at first we want to compare whether the name from this Excel file is matching with the drop down, the list the values in the drop down. So for that, what you want, you can use a find children activity. Okay, to get the all the like values in the drop down, so that you can later match it with your name. So you can use find children activity to get all the values in the drop down. Give it a name, find uh, all values in the drop down. Okay, for that you can use find children activity and specify the UI element. Mm, specify the UI element. So actually it will return all the child nodes of this particular UI element, and it is stored in this format. So we can provide a name, that is name list. Actually, if you look the variable section, the name list is actually IE enumerable UI element. Okay, it is actually a collection of many child nodes having variable type as UI element. Okay, so why we have actually used this find children activity, so that we can get all the values, all the drop down values, so that we can compare it with the name. If the name is not equivalent to any of these drop down values, you can throw a business exception. Okay, now after getting all the values, you now have to compare these values with the name provided in the Excel sheet. So for that, before that, okay, so that you have to do. And if you look at the customer name, it is fully capitalized without any spacing between them. If you consider Sanjay chain, you can see the name like this. If you look at the Excel file name, what you can find, it is bit more different. Yes, because Sanjay, white space Jain, and some here not all are at capital letters. Okay, the first letter is capital, other is small, then capital, small. But if you look in the drop down list, all are capital. So first we have to make changes to our name in the Excel file. So for that, you can use a assign activity to retrieve the value of name here. Okay, so let's say create a variable here, name. Just change the scope to process. Okay, so name. Now we know that our name can be directly retrieved from the transaction item, because transaction item is a data row. And how you can retrieve that, and I can show you by typing here in transaction item. It is a data row, and you want to specify the column index where the name is present. The column index is actually the it is zeroth column index. You can specify it there. So just specify 0 dot to string. Okay, dot to string. And since we have obtained the name here, now our main aim is what, like if you compare like the name here and name the Excel file, it is completely different. So you can see there is no white spacing in the name provided here, and all are fully capitalized. Okay, so at first we can, and in the Excel file you can see there is some white spacing or spacing between the Sanjay and first name and last name. So to avoid the spacing between this first name and last name, you can use another code along within this assign activity itself, because this will actually retrieve the value of that name. That is, in if you take the case of first transaction, it will retrieve the value of Sanjay Jain. Okay, now we want to remove this white spacing. For that, you can just type a code along with this dot replace dot replace. It will replace. First, you want to provide the which value you want to replace. In our case, we want to replace this white spacing. So just specify white spacing here. Then with the what value you want to replace. You doesn't want to do nothing. Like you want to remove this white space now. So you can use like this. It actually represents a white space and it doesn't represent there should be no white space. Okay, that is why I have provided like this. Okay, so what is the use of this code? This code actually replaces the white space from the given string, so that now they are merged together. The first name and last name are merged together without any white space. So next step is what? Next, if you look at the like they are fully capitalized, that we will do when we are uh, when we are typing the values, that we can do at that time. Okay, now in this case we have replaced the what, this white spacing here. Okay, so the capitalized we can do while we are typing that value into that drop down. Okay, so I will show you that at that time. So now we have removed the white spacing. So give it a name. Let's say assign name. Okay, so after assigning name, now also you have find the you are able to find all the values in the drop down using the find children activity. Now actually the find children activity return all the child elements of this UI element. Okay, so you want to know in which attribute you can find all these name values, etc. So actually if you want to find that you can just go to, let's say, UI Explorer. Let me open it. So you can find in which section actually you can find uh, this name, this drop down values. Okay, so just yeah, so I will show you. Okay, to click here, you can see. Okay, now if you look at in this section, you can see that there are some attributes, and you can see that if you look at the inner text attribute, you can find the details. You can find, I think, if you just okay, if you look at the inner text attribute, you can in if you look at the inner text attribute, what you can find, you can find the details of every customer name you can find in the inner text attribute. So using this find children, through this inner text activity we can verify whether that name is like present in the drop down list or not. Okay, so we have understood in the inner text attribute we can find all the customer name from the drop down list. Okay, so that is why I have shown you through this UI Explorer itself. Where is the through which attribute we can get these drop down values. Okay, now we have known that in the inner text we can find the all the customer names. Now we want to compare, or we want to check whether name is whether our name from this Excel sheet is present in the customer name or not. Okay, for that whether our name is present in this drop down list or not, for that you can use an if condition. Okay, if condition, and drag and drop it here. So if, let's say, give it a name sorry name exist. It's a big long code. Okay, so we have stored our all the child elements or these children now elements in the name list. So we can, like, now in this section on this if sequence, we are checking whether our name is existing within this all this child node of this drop down UI element. For that I'm just typing a long code. It is mostly a long code. Name dot list dot as enumerable dot where just sorry, as enumerable dot where I will explain you this code. Function a dot get, actually from which attribute you want to get the this customer name. Actually you can get it from the inner text attribute. Okay, so you can specify that attribute here. I will explain you this code actually later after typing this inner text. I hope it is correct. Inner text, inner text, it is actually, you can see it is actually object dot to string dot uh, dot contains and to specify. Just let me type here, it's big code actually. Dot contains, actually we want to type name dot count greater than 0. Okay, it's a big code actually, so I will explain what is actually being done here. So in general, in overview, what I can say from this code is it is actually iterating through each of these child nodes of this name list, because name list contains the list of the child node of this UI element drop down. Okay, so by using this code, like name list dot as enumerable, it is actually looping through each child node, and it is like checking, like this function of a dot get inner text dot to string. It is like retrieving what a dot get inner text, it is actually retrieving the this attribute value. The attribute value is actually this whole value itself. Okay, so it is actually retrieving the whole value, and it is checking whether in that it contains this name value. Okay, and that is why we are using dot contain name. It is actually checking whether in that attribute whether it contain any string having value as name. Dot count greater than 0. Why? If that name, like if there is a name, then the count should be what? 1. Okay, so it should be always greater than 0. That is why we provide greater than 0 there. Okay, so that is what actually I have specified in the condition. And like for example, if the name is not present in that inner text attribute value, then what should be the count? It should be 0. So the condition will not be satisfied. So it indicates what? The name is not present in the drop down list. If name is present in the drop down list, it indicates that count value should be 1. Okay, so that is what this code actually, this long code actually signifies. So if you have any doubts, you can ask or you can just comment in that comment box regarding this code. I will help you to explain this. If you have any doubts on this, it is bit much more longer code. Take some time to understand it actually. Okay, so through this code, we are actually verifying whether in this inner text attribute do our name values existing. Like inner text attribute has a long value. If it contains this name value, if this, that is actually is checking here, means it is actually checking the count of this name, means whether if this name value is existing in this inner text attribute, it is actually taking its count. If its count is greater than 0, indicates that that name is present in that inner text attribute. And if the name is present in that inner text attribute, then what we want to do, we can, like if the name is present in the inner text attribute, we can select that name here. Okay, for selecting this name from the drop down arrow, drop down what we can use, we can use select item activity to give it a name. Let's say select what, select customer name. Okay, so now you want to indicate it on the screen. Me, so you can see the drop down, actually it is actually retrieving all the values from the drop down, and what we want to type like is the name actually. So name, like means if the attribute value, the inner text attribute value contains our name, then we want to type the we want to select that name from this drop down value. But we know that when we have assigned this value name from this transaction item, we only remove the white spacing from this name, we don't capitalize it. So we want to capitalize here. So for that what we want to use is name. This name actually contains the name where the white space between the first name and last name has been removed. Next is we want to capitalize it. For capitalizing it, we can use name dot to upper. It will actually capitalize the whole name itself. Okay, so that is its use. Okay, so that is what we have done in then condition. That means if this inner text attribute value contains this name, then we can select that customer name from the drop down arrow. If it doesn't consist, if it doesn't contains that name, then what we want to do, we can throw the business rule exception there. So use throw activity to throw a business rule exception. So give it a name, let's say new business rule exception. What is, you can give it a name, let's say customer name not found in the drop down. So that is a message or the reason you can provide for this error. So you can specify throw error. So what is the advantage of throwing this error? By throwing this error, you can make our RE framework to skip this transaction and go to next transaction, because doing this transaction again and again has no use actually. So it is better to skip this transaction because the data provided is incorrect. Okay, so by this we have selected the name. So when we select name, all these value will get populated. You can just check here. So when you select name, you can see all the values in this section will get populated. So we don't have to type anything here. Next, what we want to type is invoice number, and the invoice number is being typed in this following format: INV hyphen 1001. Okay, we can, like, for every transaction or for every customer for which we are creating the invoice number should be unique. And now in my case, what I'm doing here is actually I am for example, for this first transaction, if the invoice number, let's say, is INV 1001. For second transaction, I am taking invoice number as INV 1002. For third transaction, I am taking it as 1003, like so on. And that is, I am incrementing for every transaction, I am incrementing the invoice number one by one. So if you just look the similarity, means for first transaction, invoice number, let's say, is INV 1001. For second transaction, invoice number is INV 1002. Okay, so in general, how you can write this? For n transaction, it should be INV hyphen 1000 plus n, where n is the transaction number. So you can generalize the invoice number by using the transaction number itself. Okay, and if you look at our process workflow, there is no transaction number. So you want to create a argument inside the process workflow so that it can receive this transaction number from outside. So give it name in transaction mm, in transaction number. Okay, and its argument type is what? It is integer. Click on save, and if you go here, now you want to like provide the variable name. Actually, since we are in the main file, the transaction number is stored over here in transaction number variable, so you can retrieve the value from the. So just go here and type transaction number. Okay, then click on OK and click on save. After this, we can say that our transaction number variable has value has been transferred to in transaction number argument. Okay, because why we are transferring that? For that we can write our invoice number and use an assign activity here. For that, what to assign? Invoice number. Give it a name, assign invoice number. Okay, so create another variable here. Invoice invoice simple name, invoice number. Okay, so just change the scope to process. Click on OK. Now assign the invoice number, invoice number, and you want to provide the invoice number in a generalized format. So actually, if you look at the invoice number section here, it is provided like this: INV hyphen 1001. Like I told you now, that is for first transaction we can provide invoice number as INV 1001. For second transaction we can provide it as INV 1002. So like that, for n transaction we can provide it as INV hyphen 1000 plus n, where n is the number of transaction occurred. So in general you can provide like this: INV plus 1000 plus in transaction number dot to string. Okay, so that is how I am generalizing it. Okay, so we are assigning the invoice number here. Okay, so then after assigning the invoice number to the invoice number variable, that's what we want to do. We want to type the invoice number here. So for that, you can use type into activity. Type into activity and the invoice number. So give it a name. It's a type invoice number. Indicate on the screen. So give it a name. What is the type value you want to type? Invoice number. Okay. So after typing the invoice number, next step is what? We want to click on the, or we want to type the billing date. So if you what should be the billing date? The billing date should be the current date itself. Okay, so for that we want to create another variable. Assign another variable, with a name, let's say billing date process, and also create another variable due date too. Okay, so due date, and click on process, because we are typing the uh, billing date and due date also, so that is why I created two variables. So Instead of assign, you can use multiple assign. So you can assign different data, multiple assign. Okay, so you can assigning, let's say assigning billing date and due date. Billing date and due date. So correctly add it. Assigning billing date and due date. So you can type billing date, and you can see why I am typed the billing date and due date in the string format is because the billing date and due date has to be typed into the using type into activity. So it should be in the string format. So while typing into this field. So now you want to specify the billing date. So what should be the billing date? The billing date should be the current date. Is it right? Yes, it should be the current date. So we can specify how to specify the current date. So you can specify system dot date time dot now dot to, sorry, date time now dot to string. And actually what this code does is it actually prints the current date, and we are converting in the string format. Now we want to specify in the format of the date. And if you look here, what is the format of the date? Let's say I take another, let's say today's date 31st. It should be in month, day, year. In this format our date is being there. So we want to type in the format like this: month, mm, so just me check it, month, date, year. Okay, so click on, let's say, year, click on OK. Okay, so after adding the billing date, next is we want to add the due date. Remember that the due date is always bill current date plus 45 days, or in other words billing date plus 45 days should be due date. So for that let's specify due date. Now you want to specify the value. It should be always 45 days after billing date. So now dot add days 45 dot to string. It should be in format month, month, month. Let me check month, date, year. Okay, click on OK. So here what we are doing here is we are assigning what due date as billing date plus 45 days, or current date plus 45 days, because billing date is the current date. You can see system dot date time dot now dot to string in the format month, date, year. Okay, and also due date is also in the same format month, date, year. Okay, so after that we are assign the billing date and due date in the string format. Next we want to type this billing date and due date into the text field. For that you can use type into activity, and let's say just let me refresh the site again. Yeah. So after that, you want to specify it on the screen. Yeah. So give it a name. Let's say type type billing date. So type the billing date here as, let's say, billing date. Okay, we are typing the billing date here. So check okay. So okay, so click on save, and after that you want to type the due date too. So type due date also, due date. Okay, so type due date. Okay, so I have typed the due date and billing date using type into activity. So after typing the billing date and due date, next is we want to select the status. Okay, so that is what we want to do. And the status, if you look for each transaction item or for each customer name, the status is being defined. Okay, but we can see that there is some the way in which they have been returned is different. You look at unpaid, you can see that this way, but if you look for the case here, you can see unpaid is like this, like capitalization of some letters are there, so the difference in way in which their return is different. So while typing also we want to make it, or while selecting that value from the drop down, we should make consider this difference also. Okay, so for that, if you take the case of, let's say, overdue, you can see overdue. O is capital, D is small. But here, if you take O is capital, D is capital. So we have to make some changes before we are taking the values or selecting the values from the drop down. For that, you can use a switch condition. So before that, try to create let's say a variable called, let's say, st. St represents status. Okay, create a st variable. St represents status. Okay, and this variable actually stores the status value of each transaction item. Okay, so we want to assign the status value to from this excel file or from this transaction item to this st variable. For that, you can specify the from the transaction item. Since transaction item is a row, you can retrieve the value of the status from this transaction item itself. For that, if you look here, we can see that what is the column index of status? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the column index of status is 5. So you can check and you can give as 5 dot to string, because output of this data of this child value is a object. So you want to convert to string. Click on OK. So give it a name, assign status. Okay, so we have assigned the status value to the st variable. Now we know that the status, even though unpaid, paid, everything are given, but they are given in a separate format in this drop down. So we have to make according to this value itself. Okay, so we can use switch activity there, because I think for paid, sorry, for unpaid and overdue, you can use switch activity mostly. For that it is easier. So for that, you want to specify a variable expression. Our variable expression is what? Status. Now change the argument type to what? String. Okay, and add a new case. What is the case value? So when the this st variable actually is extracting the value of the status from the Excel file. Okay, so we have to make changes to the status value so that it will match with the drop down value itself. Okay, so for that, what you can use here is you can use a switch condition, and first you can assign a new case. Let's say, like, for which cases actually this problem is arising. That is, let's say for paid, if you take paid, you check with the drop down case. I think for paid, I think it is okay. You can see capital, P is capital, others are small. Same thing that is mentioned in the Excel file. If you take the case of unpaid here, U is capital, P is capital. If you look in the drop down value, you can see U is capital, P is not capital. Okay, so we have to change that also. If you take the case of overdue, O is capital here, D is small here. But here, if you take the Excel value, O is capital, D is capital. So we want to change unpaid and overdue here. So for that, you can use switch activity, add a new case. When ST value is what? ST value is, let's say just ST value is, let's say, unpaid. Okay, and ST value is unpaid. Then you can use an assign condition, ST equal to what? Like when it is unpaid, you want to change this into the type like this, because in the drop down only unpaid value is in this format, so you want to change in this format. For that, you can just so you can assign this variable to the st when status is actually unpaid. So just assign like this, unpaid. Okay, so I think just check whether it is correct or not. Status is unpaid. Okay. Next, add another case. When what? When the status is in this case is overdue. Okay. When the status is overdue, what changes you have to make there? So add a new case. When status is overdue, you can assign like when status is overdue, this status should, if you look the status of overdue here, there is some like alphabetical format changes here, so you have to make it according to that drop down value. If the status is overdue, you want to assign status as overdue itself as shown in this drop down value. So you can use assign activity there. So you can use st is equal to what? Over overdue. Sorry, it's wrong. Over due. Okay, so st is equal to overdue. It's correct. Okay, so for other values, I think for paid it is correct also. Okay, so there is no need to change that too. Okay. So here we have changed the status according to the drop down condition there. Okay. So after changing that, next is you want to select the corresponding status of the each transaction item. So for that you can use a select item activity. So you can just give select item, give it a name, that is select status, and select the status drop down here. Okay, so you can see values are image. So here you can specify it as st. Okay, so now you have selected the status from the drop down arrow. After selecting the status, you want to type all these other values. So first is product. Here you want to type what? This thing. For each transaction item in the product section, you want to type this data. Okay, so you can use another type into activity and just indicate this on screen. Sorry, just take this and indicate it on the screen. Yes, here just indicate it again. I think now type just give it a name, type product. here you want to type the product. So we know that we can retrieve it directly from the transaction item. For that you have to type the code like this. In transaction item you want to specify the column index. For product the column index is what? 0 1. 1 is the column index of product, so specify the column index as 1 dot to string. Okay, so by this you can retrieve the value of product. Okay, so use simulate type. Okay, so type product. Similarly, next what you want to type after that, if you look here you want to type quantity. Also quantity is being specified here too, like a quantity is also specified for each transaction item, so you can directly write from the transaction item itself. So just select empty field. Okay, so type into, sorry, type into, let's say, give it a name, type into quantity. Okay, so type into quantity. Now you want to specify the quantity here. Okay, so give it, let's say, empty field and simulate click. Now you want to specify quantity which can be directly retrieved from what? Transaction item. So transaction item bracket you want to provide the column index where the quantity is there, that is 0 1 2. So it is in the second column index. So you can see 2, the output is an object you want to convert to string. Okay, so we have typed quantity. After typing quantity, next is what you want to type. You want to type the price. So price also you can see for each transaction item price is shown or price is given. So you can type that price itself. Okay. For that you can use another type into activity to type into price. Let's say type into uh, price. So just indicate this on the screen. Okay, so just indicate this on the screen. 1 minute again it indicated. Okay, now you want to type the price, so you can directly retrieve from transaction item. Transaction item price is, it's in which column index? 0 1 2 3. It is in third column index, so type it as 3 dot to string. Check for that 0 1 2 3. Yes, it's correct. Just I confirm it. So after typing the price, so next what you want to type? You want to type a tax. Already in the challenge description it was given that the tax is should be provided as 18, because that 18 represent what? 18 percentage of GST. So for all the transaction item the tax should be provided as 18 itself. Okay, so for that again use another type into activity. Check whether you have selected the empty field and simulate type. So type into what? Type into tax. So empty field, simulate type. Type into tax. Now I told you that for every transaction item you want to specify it as 80, because in the challenge description it was given that you should type as tax as what? 18% of GST, which represent you want to type 18 there itself. Okay, so after typing the tax, next what you want to type? Next you want to type is discount. So for that you can use another type into activity. Okay, so type into discount. Okay, and the discount value is also provided for each transaction item. If you look for each transaction item, the discount value is provided. You can say 350, 0, 125, like that. So you can directly retrieve from the transaction item itself. So for that just indicate that on the screen, the just indicate the text field. Now type the uh, you can directly retrieve from the transaction item. In transaction item, discount column index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Fourth column index. So you can specify it as 4 dot to string. Okay. So since we have we have inputted all the text fields, after completing all the text field, next what we want to do, we want to click on save invoices. So after that you can just use another click activity. Okay, so after clicking the save invoice, we can say that our invoice is being created successfully. Okay, so you can use click what, save invoice. Okay, click save invoice. Okay, so now indicate this on the screen. Yes, now click on simulate click so that action can be very faster. Okay, so like I think it's a big process actually. So this is actually what we have done in creating the invoice section or sequence. What we have done actually, we have done is we actually type all the data, all the customer data required from this Excel file to this website or to this web page, and after filling all the data we click on save invoice so that the invoice is being created for that particular transaction item. Okay, so that is what we have done in this creating invoice sequence. It is much longer sequence compared to other two sequence. Okay, other two sequence are very less, have less step. Around this has around 17 actions. Other actually has less, I think. So we have done the process of creating invoices. Okay. So after creating the sequence for creating invoice, so next step is after creating that invoice, we want to download that invoice and we want to save it in a specified folder. Okay, so just for an instance, just I just create a invoice for demonstration by using the data from our Excel file. So let's say I take the I create the invoice for this first customer Sanjay Jain. So let me create for showing you what we want to do. So just create Sanjay Jain and click, let's say, invoice INV 1001 because it is the first transaction. Uh, so it's a first transaction item, so invoice number can start from 1001. Okay, and due date should be 45 days after this. So let me randomly select this, and because I'm just showing this for demonstration. So say status should be, let's say, paid. Okay, status should be paid, and give the product description. So just copy paste from here. Okay, so just copy paste from here and paste it here, and type the quantity is 5. Okay, and price should be 440, and the tax should be provided as 18, which actually represent 18 percentage discount. Discount should be 350 for the first transaction item. Just provide it as 350. So after filling all this data, we want to click on save invoice so that the invoice is being created. Now you can see that when you click on save invoice, now you can see like this. That is your direct to invoice list. You are directed to invoice list. So you can where you can see the generated invoice list. Now since we have created an invoice, you can see this invoice here. Okay, so in our sequence, that is downloading the invoice, what we have to do here is we want to click on this download button, and when you click on download button, a pop-up will appear, which actually and in this section or in this file name field, we want to type the file path where we want to store our invoice, and invoice. Okay, and along with that, along with downloading the invoice, we want to extract the total amount details also, because we know that our main automation work is we want to create the invoice, then we want to download the invoice, and also we want to update this excel sheet with invoice number, total amount and comment. Invoice number already we have got it. We have created it in the create invoice sequence. We have created the invoice number variable. You can directly get the invoice number from the, to get the total amount you can directly retrieve the total amount by this. Okay, from this you can get the total amount. And in the case of comment, you can provide success if the invoice has been created successfully, or failure if the invoice has not been created, sometime due to the wrong data, etc., that will come. So in this sequence, that is downloading invoice, what we want to do, we want to first, we want to download the invoice and we want to save it in a specified folder, and also along with that we want to extract the total amount details. And after downloading the invoice, make sure that try to delete this invoice. Okay, so that you can prevent a list of invoice. Okay, so just you can delete it also after downloading. Okay, we can see that. So now just create another sequence. uh, okay, create another sequence. So the sequence name should be download invoices. Okay, so it actually what we are doing here is, where once the in the in the creating invoice sequence, we are creating the invoices, and after creating the invoice we want to download the invoice and we want to extract the total amount data also. Okay, after doing all these things, we can delete the invoice too. Okay, so that is all what we are doing in this sequence. So first what we want to do, first first step is you want to click on this download option. Okay, so just use a click activity. I will tell you why we are deleting the invoice later when we are applying it. So click your download invoices. Okay, click download invoice. Okay, or can you click download button. Okay, so just indicate that button. Okay, so when you click, okay, so you have clicked the download button for downloading the invoice. Just click on simulate click. Okay, so actually when you click on download button, what happens, let's say when we click on download button, a save as dialog box will appear, and here in the file name section we want to type the file path where we need to store our invoice. Okay, so before doing that, we want to create a folder in our workflow itself where we can store our all the invoice data. Okay, for that click on new and just create another folder. Give it a name, let's say invoices, where we can store all the invoice PDF file. Okay, so so in this step what we have done, we have click on download button. So just go to select okay, it's okay. So we have click on download button. So since we have click on download button, what happens, a pop-up will appear. Now in this what we want to do, we want to type the all the file path and then we want to click on save. So for that you can use a type into activity. Just plus type into activity. Okay, and you can just give it a name, type into give it a name, type into file path. Okay, so just indicate on the screen where you want to give the file path. Okay, so then click on empty type, and now you want to specify the file path. Okay, so before that, let me check. Second, yeah, process. Okay, so what should be the file path? Okay, so we can just type it here. The file path. The file path should be, first we want to specify the our workflow path or workflow folder path. For that we can use environment dot current directory. This environment dot current directory will return the value of a workflows folder path. Okay, plus now we want to give the path where we want to store our invoice in the workflow folder where we are storing our invoices. Let me give you in our workflow folder we are storing our invoices in the invoice folder section. Okay, so we want to specify that name also here. So environment.current directory will give the our workflow folder position. Now you want to specify the folder name where we want to store our invoice data. So we can give it as invoices. Okay, plus now you want to give the now you want to give what the file name. You can give the file name as a invoice number itself. So invoice number actually is stored in which variable? Invoice number variable. So you can directly retrieve that value, invoice number. Plus, after naming the file you have to name in which extension you are saving, and your invoice is actually in which extent, in which file format, in PDF file format. So save it in the PDF file format. Okay, so this is the complete path of a invoice file where we want to save it. That is, to the invoice folder we want to save it. So we are specifying the path like this. Okay, and also the file name is as invoice number dot pdf. Okay, so then you want to click on OK. Okay, so after clicking on this, after typing the file path, so next step is what we want to click on save button. You can see here we want to click on save button. So for that you can use type into activity, sorry, click activity for clicking the save button. So you can use click save button. Okay, click save button and just click on the save button. Okay, so when you click on save button, what happens? Let's say just for a sake I'm downloading it here. Give it a name, let's say invoice. You click on save, you can see that your file gets saved in, for instance actually I'm saving it in my let's say desktop folder. So you can see the file is being saved here. Okay, so our main aim of this sequence, that is download invoice, has been completed. Okay, next is what we want to retrieve, what this total amount, okay, which is to be required for inputting to this excel file, okay, for updating. For that what you want to do is you can use a get text activity. Get text activity, get text activity. So give it a name, get total amount. Okay, so for that just create another variable. Again, just create another variable, that is total amount, and it should be stored in the string format, and its scope should be in the process section. And after that click on OK. And now you want to indicate the total amount value on the screen. So okay, so just check the selector. Yeah, it's okay. Okay. It's okay. So after getting the total amount, you can see that you actually download the invoice, you get the total amount. And you can remove this invoice also, like after getting all the details, then you this invoice is this invoice in the invoice list is not required, since you have retrieved the invoice data in the PDF file format, also you have retrieved the amount, then there is you can delete this also. Okay, so that you can avoid the like many invoice data being piled up here. Okay, so it's a best practice. And also at that time you can avoid that complex step, like if you are not deleting all the invoice, then and you want to extract the data from this invoice later, it may be bit much complex way. But in simpler way you can do is, like after downloading the invoice you can delete that invoice, so that the process can be repeated for all the transaction items in a fine manner. Okay, so you can delete that. For that you can use another click activity, because when I see in this challenge is that most of the people after doing the challenge they didn't delete their invoices data. So so we can delete it so that we can avoid a pile up of this invoice data with them. And also like after taking one data, like the selector issue will not be there. To avoid such cases, actually I have deleted the data, so that next time when it is extracting the data it will be fine. Okay, so I hope you have understood that section. So then click on delete option. Okay, so let me click on simulate click. Click press okay. 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 So after deleting the invoices, like after deleting the invoice, like we have completed our download invoice section. That is what we have done, we are actually downloading the invoices. Okay, so what we have done, just I will summarize. We have clicked the download button, we download the invoice, we extract the total amount number which is to be updated in the Excel file, then we click on, we deleted that invoice from the invoice list. Okay, so after downloading the invoice, next step is what? Last, that is the last sequence. What we want to do here, we want to update the Excel file for that corresponding transaction item or for that corresponding customer number. So you want to update these values. So you can just create another sequence for that. Just go to sequence, just drag and drop another sequence, and in this sequence what we are going to do is we are updating that Excel file with the values of invoice number, also the total amount. Comment section we can set it in the set transaction status, because the comment section actually signifies whether our invoice has been processed successfully or not. Like for example, I told you that in the beginning of creating invoice, we are checking whether the name in the Excel file is matching with any of the values in the drop down. If it is not matching, then invoice for that customer is not created. So at that time you can set your comment as failure for that particular transaction item. So it is better that you can specify that this comment section of writing the data to comment section in the set transaction status. Okay, so that where you can signify whether your transaction is successfully done or not. Okay, so just close the sequence, and next sequence is what? Next sequence is we are updating the Excel file. So give updating Excel file. Okay, so you can use Excel application scope for that. Specify Excel application scope. Now you want to specify the workbook path. So since we have stored that workbook path in our config file, you can directly retrieve that path from the config file itself. Yeah, we have specified that Excel file in our config file itself. So you can directly retrieve in our RE framework using in config dictionary. For that, use in config. Just specify the key. Key should be what? Key should be Excel. Let's say Excel. Excel dot to string. Okay, this will output the value of the file path of the Excel file where we want to update our values. Now, so next what we want to do is we want to update the invoice number and total amount. Command we will update in the set transaction section. Okay, so for that you can use write cell activity for writing invoice number as well as the total amount. So I think I have forgotten something. Let me check whether we, yeah, actually in the get text we are retrieving the value of our total amount, but we are not store, we have forgotten to store in a variable. So already I have assigned a variable for that total amount. So you can store the value that is obtained from this get text into a variable. For that just specify total amount here, which will actually store this value directly there. Okay. So next we can move on to next sequence, that is updating Excel file. So here what we want to do is we have defined Excel application scope and we want to update our Excel file with invoice number and total amount. So for that you can use write cell activity. Okay, write cell activity under Excel section. So write cell. Okay, so you can give it a write invoice number. So here we are writing the invoice number. So we want to specify the sheet name. Let me check, the sheet name is at sheet 1 itself. And now you want to provide a cell in which you want to input your value. And you know that for each transaction item the cell value will changes. So we want to make in a dynamical format. Okay. So if you go to that Excel file, you can see that for first transaction we are writing it in which cell. For invoice number we are writing it in which cell? We are writing it in the G2 cell. For second transaction we are writing in G3 cell. For third transaction we are writing in G4 cell, and so on. So in general how you can write is uh, like the column name actually remains same plus uh, plus in transaction number. Like if you look here, for first transaction we are writing in G2 cell. For second transaction we are writing in G3 cell. Okay. So for nth transaction we can write in G plus 1 plus nth cell. Okay. So where n is the number of transaction. So you can write in transaction number plus 1. In transaction number plus 1. Since output is an integer, we want to convert to dot to string. Okay, so G plus in transaction number plus 1 dot to string. Okay, so in this way we can change the cell value dynamically. Okay, so for first transaction it will write in G2 cell, second transaction it will write in G3 cell. Okay, so it will follow that. Okay, so after that you want to specify the value you want to input the, and we know that the invoice value is already stored where in the invoice number itself. So you can directly specify that here. Okay, so invoice number. Okay, so we have updated the invoice number for a particular transaction item. Okay, so after updating the invoice number, next is we want to update the total amount. For that, you can use another write cell activity which can update it with the total amount. So you can write total amount. So similarly, here also we want to change the cell value dynamically. So if you look at this Excel sheet, we want to update the total amount value. For the first transaction, we are writing the total amount in which cell? In the H2 cell. For the second transaction, we are writing in H3 cell. For third transaction, we are writing in H4 cell. For like that, it will continue. So in general, how you can specify it is H plus in transaction number plus 1 for any nth transaction or any transaction. So you can write in general way as H plus in transaction number plus 1. The output is a integer. You want to convert to string, dot to string. So if you look here, if transaction number is 1, it will write in H2 cell. That is what we want. Okay, you can check. Okay, for second transaction, it should write in H3 cell. That is also okay. So in this way, we can allocate the cell right dynamically. Okay, for every transaction item. So after that, now you want to specify the value. Already, from using the get text, we have stored that value in the total amount variable. So you can specify the total amount variable there itself. So total amount. Okay. So now, so the next part, the next sequence we also have done here. That is updating our Excel file with what? With invoice number and total amount. Okay, the command we will do in the set transaction section that we will see now after some time. So so that part of updating the invoice number and total amount is being done. Okay, so after updating, like when we are updating all these values, like if you take, that is when we are updating all these values, like comment section will update the set transaction. Just see, when we are updating these values and we are moving to next transaction. Okay, so when we are updating our values, after updating the values, next step is what? We want to create another invoice because we are moved to next transaction for creating the invoice. So we want to add so for that we want to click on this add new invoice, because when you click on add new invoice, it will move to that it will move to that page where we can create our invoice. Okay, so for that we want to click on where add a new invoice. So for that just at the last step, you can just specify a click activity to click on add invoice, so that for next transaction, for so that the like it will actually direct to the page where we want to type the data for creating the invoice. For that just go to click and then use click um, click what, let me check, add new invoice, give it a name, add new invoice. Okay, so I hope why you are clicking, I hope you understand why you are using this option here. That is, like after doing all this process, okay, we want like we are actually going to next transaction because the section in the process section actually has been completed. So now we are moving on to the next transaction item actually after in the after doing all the steps in the process section. So while moving to next transaction means we want to create another invoice for that customer. For that we want to move to the page where the invoice has to be created. For that we want to click on add invoice at the last step there in our process section. So just indicate that button and just click on simulate click, then click on OK. So this also has been done. Okay, so we have completed our process section. Okay, so in the process section, in general way, I will summarize what we have done. First, we have created a sequence for creating the invoice by inputting the data here and then clicking on save invoice. So after clicking on save invoice, we created another sequence which actually download the invoices from the invoice list as shown here. So after clicking on save invoice, we are directed to the invoice list, and from the invoice list you can see the invoice being created, and we are clicking on download invoice. And when you click on download invoice, it will actually open a pop-up which will actually ask where we want to save our file. And here we have created, inside the workflow we have created a invoice folder where we are actually saving all our invoices in the PDF format. And after that we are clicking on after typing that file path, we are clicking on save button in the dialog box. And after that, like after downloading the invoice, we want to retrieve this total amount. For that we are using the get text activity, and after completing all the steps you can just delete this invoice so that you can avoid the pile uping of many invoices list here, or so that when next transaction comes you can easily do it, right? Okay, so that is why I have deleted that invoice section, I have used click delete option for deleting the invoice, that is can reduce the many pile uping of many invoice list. Okay, so that is, and after that downloading invoice, then we update the value excel values, that is this excel sheet values with the invoice number and total amount, and the comment section we are doing in the set transaction that we'll do now. Okay, and after updating all this value we are going to clicking on add new invoice, so that it will go to the page where the invoice has to be created for the next transaction. Okay, so after doing all these processes, so next we want, like we have updated the values for invoice number and total amount. Next we can move on to set transaction workflow, where we can give the value for comment based on the condition. That is, if it is successful we can give it as success, if it fails due to business exception you can provide it as failed. Okay, so for that you can just go to set transaction workflow. So just go to open the framework folder and just open set transaction status. Okay, so in set transaction status you can, like you can see different conditions: success, business exception, system exception. So let's consider first case, when our transaction is successful, means we are able to create the invoice. So in that what we want to do, what we want to write in the comment section, we want to write it as success. So for that you can just click here, and now use a right cell activity here to um, right cell, uh, just to give the workflow workbook right cell activity. Okay, so now you want to specify the config. Let me check. Yeah. Now we want to specify the what, like our file path or excel file path where you want to enter the comment. For that you can specify the excel file path as in config, what should be the key value, key name, key name is excel, so just specify it as, let's say, excel dot to string. Now specify sheet 1. Now you want to specify the cell value. So if you look, because we want to allocate it as dynamically so that it works for every transaction. Okay, so if you take the case of first transaction, the comment is returned in verb I2. Second transaction comment is returned in I3. In third transaction comment is returned in I4. So in general, if n is the transaction number, the comment should be written in I plus n plus 1 cell. So in general, how you can write it is like this. Cell value you can specify it as I plus in transaction, I think let me 1 minute. I think I have specified as input output transaction number. Okay, specify it as sorry. So in general, how you can specify the cell as I plus input output transaction number plus 1, and output of this input output transaction number plus 1 is what is an integer you want to convert to string, so use dot to string. So you can see here that is let me, is this cut or not. Then you can see that for the first transaction the comment is returned in I2. Second transaction comment is returned in verb in I3, and so on. Okay, so now we have set the value for cell value dynamically. Now we want to specify the cell content. We know that if our transaction is success, you want to specify it as what? Success. Okay. So just give it a name, right? Success. Okay. In comment. Okay. So then click on save. Okay. Sorry. Just open that set transaction section again. Okay. So like we have created the the activity which actually writes a comment as success when our transaction item is success using the right cell activity in the success section. Now if you just move back, you can see we have write the activity, or we have write the code for writing the comment as success when our transaction item is success. So next is we want to write it as fail when a business exception occurred. What should we write in the comment section? We should write it as failed. So for that, use again the right cell activity. So just specify it as here as right cell. So book. Okay. So give it a name. Right. Say failed. Okay. So give it a name. Let's say in config. Excel dot string. Now you can specify sheet 1 is sheet 1. Now you want to like dynamically give the cell name. So in our previous, while we have created the comment for writing success, how we have write it in a generic way: I plus input output transaction number plus 1, so that for first transaction it is returning I2, for second transaction it is returning I3, and so on. So for that, in general, how you can write this: I plus input output transaction number plus 1. So it is a what? Integer. You want to convert to what? To a string. For that, use dot to string. Okay. So click OK. So now you want to specify the condition. That is either it as failed. Okay, failed. So click on save. After that, so okay, so we have we have give the code for writing the command either as success or failed. Okay, so that part is also okay. That is updating Excel part is also okay. Okay, so let me check whether anything is wrong or not. So just go to this, just check that long code that we have typed to check whether the name exists or not is correct. Okay, so that let me check that. So name list dot as enumerable word function a dot get inner text to string contain name. I think we have made some error here. What's error? And just let me check this one. Oh, yeah, I got the error actually, because like the name variable that we are assigning, to this name variable, we are assigning that value or from transaction item. Like we are assigning the name variable from the we are actually assigning the name variable from the transaction item, and along with that we are replacing that white space between the first name and last name and merging them. Okay, so that is what we have assigned to the name variable. And we know that if you check the inner text, you can see that all the names are capitalized. So we have to, like, since we what we have done to name variable is we have just merged the first name and last name, we didn't capitalize it. So we should capitalize it so that it can easily compare. because here if we didn't capitalize it, what happens? It is actually, what does this code is actually doing? This code is actually looping through all the child loop, and it is checking whether the inner text attribute contains a name. And if you check the inner text, what you can see, they are all capitalized. And what the name variable actually contain? It also contains the name, but it is not capitalized. So we want to make it capitalized so that it can check. For that, you can use contains name dot to upper. Okay, so this name dot to upper convert that merged name, the merged first name and last name without any white space into a all capital letters. Okay, in that way we can able to compare it. Okay, so that is the error, so please note that too. Okay, so click on save, and just close this. Okay, so after creating the invoice, downloading the invoice and updating the Excel file, we want to do the same process for all the transaction. That is creating the invoice, downloading the invoice, updating the Excel value of invoice number, total amount and comment for all the transaction. So after doing all these things, next step is what? In the automation chat was described, that is after updating the Excel file with all the values and after downloading all the invoices, next step is we want to zip that invoice, all the invoice in a zip folder, and then along with this updated Excel file we want to send an email. For now in our case we can just send to our email itself for demonstration. Okay, so where you can put that process? Okay, you can put that is zipping the file and saving, or zipping the file and email process, we can put it in the get transaction state. Why? I will tell you. So if you just go back, uh, open the workflow, the get transaction data. like So in get transaction data, we have provided a condition of assigned transaction item. That is, when transaction number is less than or equal to input output transaction data dot rows dot count. Means when transaction number is less than the number of rows inside the transaction data, we can assign the transaction number. If it is greater, it indicates that what our process has been done, or we have processed. If the transaction number is greater than the row count of this transaction data, what does it indicate? It indicates that we have gone through processing all our transaction item. Okay, and which means that we have come to the end process itself. Okay, so processing all the transaction item means what we have done, for in our case we have created the invoice, download the invoice and update all the values. So we can say that when we are assigning transaction item as nothing, actually we are we are ending our process. Okay, so before ending our process, what we want to do, after creating all the invoices etc., the automation challenge description, it was described that after updating all these values, we want to zip that folder where we have stored our invoices, and along with the zip file and along with this updated Excel sheet, we want to email it. Okay, so that step we can do in this else condition, because this else condition implies that our process has been actually come to an end. So for that we can do this process in the else condition itself. Okay, so for that, what we want to do here is we want to create another sequence which actually zip the invoice, all the invoices, and also mail it. For that, just drag and drop another sequence. So what is its use? Zip and email. Okay, so for that, I hope you have understood why I have used this sequence here. Okay, because when transaction item is assigned as nothing, it indicates that all our transaction has been processed. So for our case, it means that we have downloaded all the invoices and also updated our Excel file. So at last, after updating our Excel file and downloading all invoices, we want to zip all that invoices to a single folder, and also along with that zip folder this Excel file has to be sent in an email. So that process we can only do here. Okay, so we have created a sequence, zip and email sequence, where we are zipping all that invoices and emailing it. For zipping, we can use activity. I'll give it a name. Its name is, I think, it's just a zip. Yeah, you can find his activity. Yeah, this is a so balreva.external.activities. You can download this. Hmm. So in this it contains an activity for zipping folders. Okay, because since we are storing all the invoices in this invoices folder, we want to we want to zip this file itself. Okay, so for that you can just search zip and zip. Yes, you can just search zip and just drag this here. Okay, so give it a name, zip invoices. Okay, which actually zip that invoice folder, because in the invoice folder you can find many invoices there, because we are saving there itself. Okay, now you want to give values. Okay, so single folder, like you want to here you want to specify in which folder you want to zip. In our case we want to zip this invoice folder because it contains all the invoices being downloaded there. So we want to provide the path of that folder. So we can give environment dot current directory, which actually give the path of a workflow folder. Now we want to give the folder which we want to zip. So give it as invoices. I think the name is correct, invoices. Okay, click on OK. Now we want to give a name for the zip file. The name for the zip file you can directly store in the workflow folder itself. So directly we can give the uh, path of the zip file directly as environment. So here in the zip file property section we are actually giving the file path of the zip file actually, and this zip file we are actually, for our case, we are storing in the same workflow folder itself. So we want to provide a path of the folder itself, workflow folder. You can provide environment dot current directory, which gives the path of a workflow folder, plus we want to give the name of the invoice zip folder, invoice zip folder. You can give it a name, invoice dot its extension. What should be its extension? Invoice dot zip. You can save in zip extension. Okay, so environment dot current directory, no, zip. Okay, so then click on OK. Okay, yeah, everything is correct. So by using this zip invoice zip activity, we are zipping that invoice folder. Okay, and we are creating a zip folder having the name invoice.zip. Okay, after zipping the invoice, next step is what we want to send the mail along with the attachment of the zip folder and also the updated Excel sheet. For that you can use SMTP mail message activity. Okay, uh, just you can provide the, here you can provide the mail where you want to send this data. So I'm just storing this in a variable. Okay, okay, and the subject you want to specify, let's say invoices, and body you can just, like what you want to write in body, you can just give uh, hey, please find the uh, attachments of invoice and uh, Excel file. Okay, so here you can actually specify the name of the sender where you want to send, for which you want to send the mail. Okay, actually I'm storing it in a sender variable. Okay, you can specify the name mail where you want to, like, for which you want to send the email. Okay, for security reasons I'm not showing that. Okay, and now you want to, like, attach the files along with while sending email. For that, can use attach file activity. And now here you can create argument which can store the file path of the files which you want to send it as an attachment to that sender. Okay, so before that, you can create two two variables here. Let's say one is zip file, and other I think is Excel file, and specify the file path. Okay, so you can create two variables, and then use assign activity to specify the file path of these two variables. So here you can give assign zip file path. Okay, so already we have specified the zip file path in the zip invoice section. We can, yeah, this is like we have already specified the file path in the zip invoice section itself. So you can directly copy this uh, and specify zip file, give it a variable zip file path. Now here you want to assign the Excel file path, assign Excel file path. So just assign Excel file path, what Excel file. Now you want to assign the Excel file path, and we know that we have stored that Excel file path in the config file itself, Excel file itself, which can be accessed using in config dictionary. So you can use in config Excel dot to string. Okay, here it actually contains the path of the Excel file, and also here we are actually storing the file path of the zip file, and both these actually we want to send it as an attachment. So you can use attach file option, click here. Now you can specify the one file here, that is which file, zip file, and next you can specify what Excel file path. Actually both these values, actually we are actually what we are transferring here is we are transferring the path of the zip file and Excel file here. Okay, and click on OK. Now after that you want to specify the port and server. Okay, the port should be for SMTP should be 465, and email server should be smtp.gmail.com. Okay, and after providing all these details, next is you want to you want to provide from which email you want to send the, you want to send the email to that sender. So for that you want to provide the email account and the password here. Okay, so after all this, the mail activity section will be completed. Okay, so please provide your account, also the password here for sending the email to that particular sender. Okay, so after completing this step of zipping file and email, so the main aim of our automation challenge is being completed here. Okay, you can see that is what was the main aim of automation challenge. For every Excel data in the Excel file, or for every customer in the Excel file, for every customer in the Excel file, you want to create the invoice, download, and you want to download the invoice, then we want to update the Excel value for each transaction item. After updating the Excel value for invoice number, total amount, comment, and downloading all the invoice to a specified folder, last step is what we want to zip that invoice folder, and also along with this email Excel file as attachment, we want to send a email, a random email, and for that we have used a SMTP mail message activity, and here we specify the arguments. So please note that while sending the email you should specify the email ID and password from which you are sending the mail to the sender. Okay, and also the sender actually have stored in a sender variable, and in that variable section you can provide the email of the sender, okay, for which you want to send the email. Okay, you should provide that before running the workflow. Okay, so we have completed this section of sending the email. I hope you have understood this section. Uh, so, so after sending the email, our automation work is completed actually. Like what is the main aim of automation challenge is accomplished here. So the next step is what? Like the next step is we want to, like after completing all the procedures, we can log out from the system and we can close this browser. Okay, so for that we can go to end process. So in end process, what we are doing, we are closing all the application, and also along with that we are killing the applications too. Okay, so for that use, go to open workflow. Now we can create another sequence which actually closes, which we by which we are logging out of this web browser and logging out of this web browser. For that we can name close browser. Okay, so for that you can use attach browser activity. Okay, so give it a name, attach invoice. You can just give it a name, attach invoice website, or anything you can give. So now we want to indicate that browser. Okay, now check the select. Now inside it, like in the close all application, what we want to do, we want to actually log out. For logging out, what you want to do, first you want to click here, then you want to click on sign out option. For that, what you want to do is you can use a click activity. Just drag and drop a click activity here. Just drag and drop a click activity here. Give it a name, click on logout. Okay, so now you want to specify the element. Just specify. mm, so just specify logout here. Let me check the selector. Everything is okay. Yeah. So next, again use another click activity. Okay, why? Because when we click on this logout, you can see that when you click on this logout, an option like this will appears. You can see that when you click on this admin option, a pop-up will like this appears. So and then we have to click on the sign out button. Okay, for that you can use another click activity. Click sign out, and just simulate click. Now specify. So now provide a delay option so that we can able to click the sign out option, and simulate click. Okay. Mm, okay. So after, like when you're clicking on sign out, so what happens here is that we are actually signing out of the our invoice creation section. So after this, what we want to do, we want to close this browser. For that, you can use close tab activity. Okay, you use close tab activity. Okay, okay, which will actually close the tab after the operation. Okay, so that is what we have done in the close out application section. Okay, so just close this. So after closing our application, next what we can do is we can kill all the processes. So for that, go to kill all process section, and here we want to kill all the processes. For that, you can use kill process. Kill means killing all the process which has been used here, because using kill all process, like it actually helps to close all the application before starting this process. Also helps to forcefully close the application in case of any system exception. That's one advantage. Here we want to close what? We want to close this Chrome. Also we want to terminate the process of this Excel file. For that we can use kill process, give it a name Chrome, and give the process name as let's say Chrome. Okay, now give drag and drop another activity, kill process, what you want to kill the process Excel. So kill process Excel. Kill process Excel. So here what we have done in kill all process, we are killing the process that is Chrome and Excel here. Okay, then click on save. So we have completed our workflow. So just we can quickly summarize what we have done throughout this workflow. So first we started with the initialization state. In the initialization state, what we have done, we are opening the browser where we want to create our invoice. So for that, first we open the browser. After that, we log to this website using the required credentials, and the credentials we are stored, since we are storing in the Windows Credential Manager, to retrieve that we have used the get credential activity. And after login, what we want to check, we want to check whether our login is successful or not. Okay, so for that we have used an element exist activity. So for that, just let me log into this page so that I can show you what we have done after login. And just log in here. Okay, so when we log in, we want to, like, after when we click on login, after that we want to check whether our login is successful or not. If our login is successful, we can do the like, if our login is successful, we can provide a log message saying that our login is success. And then after that, if our login is successful, we want to click on invoice system, then we want to click on add invoices. Okay, if our login is not successful, which implies that our credential data is incorrect, so we can provide a log message saying that our provider data is incorrect, and also we can throw a business exception so that our process can end. Okay, so that is all what we have done in the init all application state. So after init all application state, we went to get transaction data state. In the get transaction data state, what we have done, we are assigning each transaction item. Okay, so for assigning each transaction item, first we want to read the Excel file from which we want to create the invoices. Okay, so this is Excel file. So in the first sequence, we are reading the Excel file based on condition like this. When it is our first transaction, we are reading this Excel file and we are storing it in the data table. Okay, input output transaction data. In the second sequence, we are actually assigning the transaction item based on the condition like this. If in transaction number is less than or equal to row count of the data table, we can assign the transaction item. If transaction number is greater than the row count of the data table, we can assign transaction item as nothing, which can mean end process. Okay, so after this, what we have done, after getting the get transaction data, we went to process transaction. in process transaction, what we have done, we actually process means using the transaction item. Transaction item indicates the data or the data of each customer for creating the invoice. Using that data, we fill all this column here, and then after that we click on save invoice. Okay, so that is all what we have done in the process section. We have divided it into three sequences. One is creating invoice. Creating invoice means for creating invoice we fill all the data. Okay, and after that we click on save invoice. Okay, that we have done in this create invoice sequence that you can show here. So that we have done here in this sequence. So after creating invoice, next section is what we want to download the invoice. For downloading the invoice, like when you click on save invoice, you are directed to the invoice list. Okay, so if you create invoice, you can see the invoice is being created here, and you can get like this information in the invoice list section. So in the next section, what we have done, we are downloading the invoice. For downloading the invoice, we click on this download option. When you click on this download option, a download save as dialog box will appear, and here we want to type the file name along by clicking on save to save the invoice in a PDF format. Okay. So after downloading that invoice, what we want to do, we want to retrieve this total amount. Okay, which has to be inputted into this Excel file in the total amount column. Okay, so that also we have done, and after retrieving all this section, then we are clicking delete invoice so that we can delete this invoice. Okay, so that is all what we have done in the download invoice state. And after that, like after downloading the invoice, what we are doing next is we are updating our Excel file for that particular transaction item, because we want to update the invoice number, we want to update the total amount and the comment. Okay, as your invoice number and the total amount is actually updated in the process sequence, while the comment is actually updated in the set transaction sequence, because comment actually indicate whether our invoice has been successfully created or not. If it is successfully created, we can assign the comment as success. If it is not successfully created, we can assign comment as failed. That is being done in the set transaction status. Total amount and invoice is being entered in the process section. Okay, that is what we have done in the updating Excel file. Here you can see that we are doing it under Excel application scope, and we are actually writing like using right cell activity, we are writing invoice number and total amount. After all doing this, we are clicking on add invoice so that we can click create new invoice for the next transaction item. Okay, so that is what we have done in the process section. Now if you move to the set transaction status, where we have we have moved to set transaction status, we actually have created the code for writing the comment section. In the case of success, we write as success, and if it in the case of business exception, we are writing it as failed. Okay, so using right cell activity. Okay, so that is what we have done for writing comment section. So after downloading all invoices, and please remember that the invoices actually are downloaded in this invoice folder. Okay, so after downloading all the invoice and also continuously updating the Excel file, next step is we are in zipping that invoice folder, and along with the updated Excel data, we are actually sending email, and that sequence is being created in the get transaction section in the then section of the assign transaction item sequence, because in the then section we are actually assigning out transaction as nothing. When out transaction is nothing, it indicates that our automation work has been completed. So the end, we can what we can do, like automation work has been completed implies means we have downloaded all the invoices, we have also updated the Excel file. So in that section we can provide a sequence where we can zip the invoices, along with we can send the email using send SMTP mail message activity. And please note that while you are sending the email, please provide your email and email account and password here from which you are sending the email. Okay, and also provide the value for the sender variable. Sender variable means for which you are sending your email. Okay, and also I have attached the files using this attached file option. I have attached a zip file and Excel file. Okay, So that is all we have done in the for completing the automation. So after automation is completed, next is we want to close the browser. For that, what we have to do, we want to close all application where we close the browser by logging out, and then we close the tab for closing the browser. So after closing the browser, what we done, we kill the process. For killing the process, we use two kill process activity, one to kill the Chrome process, another to kill the Excel process. Okay, so this is all what we have done in our invoice processing workflow. Okay. So before running, try to close all the applications. Okay, that are opened. Okay. Also try to delete this invoice also, because we have created just for demonstration. Okay. So just log out. Uh, Click open. Okay, and just close this too. Yeah. Close this also. Okay. So we can run the workflow to see what happens. So it is running. Yeah, so it is running. And first it opens, you can see first it opens the browser and type the required credential, then log to the system. After that, it will click on add invoice, then it will create the invoice, you can see. And you can also see that for each customer name, there is a unique invoice number is created. After creating invoice, it will download that invoice with file name as invoice number itself in a PDF file format. After that, it will delete that created invoice. Next, it will go to the second transaction item and will process the same way. Okay, you can see that here. And also you can see that it is typing billing date and due date. The billing date is actually around 40, that is the billing date is the current date, while the due date is billing date plus 45 days, that you can see. Yeah, you can see it is typing everything. Thing, yeah. So you can see everything is working fine. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So you can see that everything is working fine. I think our workflow is working fine. Uh, I think we have to process around 10 data actually. We have to process 10 invoices totally. Okay. Uh, yeah, it has run successfully. You can see here. Yeah, first transaction, second transaction, third, and everything is okay. And now if you go here and click on folder, So actually, what is the last step of our automation challenge? Like after downloading all invoices and after updating the Excel file, what it will do? It will zip that invoice folder along with the invoice zip folder and the updated Excel file. It will send an email. You can see that all the invoices has been downloaded and stored in the invoices folder, and also you can see that it is zipped also. You can see a zip file is also created, and if you open this RPA challenge file, you can see that all the data has been updated here, and you can see all the amount also comment whether the creation has been done successfully or not. Okay, everything has been updated here. Okay, and also we can just check our mail whether the email has been sent. For that, just log to my mail. You can see that yeah, you can see that the email also has been sent, that along with the attachment of the invoice zip folder along with the updated Excel file. Okay, so that which is the last step of our automation challenge. So from this, what we can say that we have run our invoice processing workflow very successfully, and I hope you have understand this process well. And if you have any doubts regarding this workflow, etc., you can just comment in the comment box. I can reach out to that, and also in the YouTube video description, I will post my challenge solution and also the challenge link. Okay, so if you like this tutorial, please subscribe for more updates. Thank you.